This is the last Sunday before Lent, so this is going to be a little of a backbone piece. Brad was saying last week, soft front, strong back, playful heart. So we're going to start with the playful bit. How many of you are or were readers of Calvin and Hobbes, the cartoon? Hands up, Mom. Good number. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, Calvin is like a kid between 4 and 5, and Hobbes is his best friend and his tiger, who comes to life at every possible moment. And in the course of the many years of this cartoon, relatively early on, Calvin creates this device. It's called a transmogrifier. And it's a cardboard box with a little dial on it. And Calvin can go into the box and pick whoever he wants to be. A mouse, a dinosaur, spaceman Spiff, who saves the world. He comes out being whoever he needs to be in the moment, and he's transmogrified. And Hobbes is always there, kind of the voice of reason, but always behind him. And it's just this wonderful, amazing thing, and great wisdom. When I first read it, I didn't actually realize that transmogrify is actually a word. Watterson didn't make it up. It means to magically transform. This is gospel which is pretty much exactly the same in all three of the synoptics. Is a profoundly transformative moment. Almost less because of the magic on top of the mountain than what it does to the hearts of the people who were there. So before we go from the past to the present, let's just unpack this a little bit together. It comes at the point where Jesus is making, and his disciples are making the transition from the Galilee to Jerusalem. In the Galilee, the beginning, and probably the majority part of his ministry, he's building a community. He's sowing the seeds of a very Jewish, but a very radical Jewish message, in the sense that it's profoundly first about vulnerability and about healing. And that was true of Judaism. It still is. But the way Jesus presented it was a little bit different. But in the Galilee, which at that time was a backwater, it wasn't Jerusalem where the political and the institutional religion was centered. So they had plenty of time to sort of hone the message, if you like. And then Jesus leads them to say, we're going to take this show on the road. We have to go to Jerusalem. We have to take it to the next step. And they were intelligent. They knew that the pushback there was going to be harder. It was a hard thing to have to do. Mount Tabor, which is where tradition says that this event in the gospel, the transfiguration, the magical change, Mount Tabor is where tradition says that this happened. And in a way, it's a very logical place. It's in northern Israel, Palestine. It's a big hill. It's about almost 1,900 feet high that sits in a flat plain, and it overlooks everything. It's about less than 20 miles from the Galilee, and if you look on a clear day, you can actually almost see the haze rising from the sea. It's on the way to Jerusalem, one of the two major routes at that time to Jerusalem. It's an amazingly meditative place if there are not a lot of tourists around. On a spring day, you can see forever, and on a summer day, it's cool. And it's a great place to meditate. You can easily imagine that there was a transformative moment at this spot. Jesus took only 3 of the disciples who, according to Mark's gospel, were with him. Why he took those 3, it's not clear. Maybe they were the ones who were the most afraid, maybe the ones better able to help the others pick up the story and follow Jesus. But he takes them up to this mountaintop for this quiet, transformative moment. And as the story goes, these 2 prophetic voices in Judaism, Moses, who establishes the identity of the community, and Elijah, who takes it on when he sees corruption within that system. They're all transformed together. And the gospel says they were afraid. I had a friend 40 years ago who said, it was a biblical scholar, he said, I don't necessarily think they were afraid of the vision. Jesus doesn't make you afraid. What they were afraid of was that trip to Jerusalem. It was scary, whether they were afraid for themselves or whether they were afraid for this person that they loved who was going to lead them there, or a combination of the two. They were scared. Justifiably so, as it turns out. But Jesus manages to persuade them to go. I don't think he said, hey, you have to go if you... That wasn't the Jesus way of doing things. Jesus was a healer, a persuader, a person who said, transform yourselves. Pick up your pallet and walk. You get to make that choice. And he manages to convince them to go. To face the challenges of the time in which they lived. Rabbi Heschel did that. A previous rector of this parish in the 1960s did that. Reverend Sherrill marched with King. The great religious voices ask us to follow them. And you've got this voice of God saying, listen to him, saying it to the disciples. But if we're the people who are saying that our path up the mountain of faith is to follow this Jesus person, this amazing model of what it is to live love in the world, then we have to do the same thing. Jesus seemed to have 2 clear points here. One, when facing adversity, the only way out is through. But also, and more importantly, love always wins. There isn't a time when it doesn't win. We may not always see it, but our experience of faith and our experience with one another tells us profoundly that it does. I think for almost everybody in this room, it would be hard to deny that we are living in tough times. Not that every generation doesn't have its challenges, but we seem to have an unusual abundance of them. We cannot ignore them. Jesus wasn't willing to ignore him. His followers were convinced not to ignore them. Knowing that they were going to fall flat in their faces on sometimes, and it would be fine. God was always there to forgive them, to hold them up, to encourage them in love. We're called to be healers of the world, and it's scary sometimes. It's scary sometimes at a personal level, and it's scary sometimes at a community level, and it's right now scalable at a planetary level. But we can do it. We can absolutely do it. For me, when I get scared, hope kind of takes a nosedive. And as some friends in here would say, I can get super intense about it. But this community is one of the places that gives me hope, because hope helps you act. At the personal level, it's in moments when we support each other, whether we're sick, whether we're facing family challenges, work challenges, financial challenges. That's the one-on-one part. This community also is always, AMC is a really cool place to be because it's willing to look and say, what do we need to heal? That's part of what our visionaries are doing with redefining ourselves in the moment of the needs of the community in which we live. We do it in big ways and do it in small ways. And we do it in transcendent ways, and we do it in practical ways. The music in this place takes us to a transcendent moment sometimes. Frequently, almost always. And then this community takes that music out into the world and has free concerts that anybody can come to. And people come. The transcendent moments of love, small ones and big ones, give us the courage to act, to go out there in the world and take on the challenges that we have to face. If we are not relevant with our faith isn't complete. It's not alive. And we can't do it alone. And a community like this is one of the ways, one of the most important ways for many of us here, to know that we're not alone. And that love always wins. Love always wins. And no matter how scary it is out there, it's got incredible beauty. Heschel, he's one of my favorites, if you haven't guessed it. Heschel not only said, we have to go out and live our faith in the world, but we have to be filled with wonder. Jesus did too. More profoundly even. Love always wins. It's what Peter and Andrew and James probably came out understanding when they came down that mountain. And with luck, because we're all working together, and because we help each other see that love in the world, we do too.